Hey guys, tonight we will walk beside a moonlit tide toward a ring of low stone houses where peat smoke mingles with salt and kelp, and every doorway glows like a patient ember. You are here in the present tense, your breath visible, your steps quiet, as the sea lays down its lace and lifts it again, and gulls drift like pieces of pale paper in the dark. There's one tiny reality check before we wander in. You probably won't survive this without help. The wind is brisk, the roofs are stone, and the ocean keeps its own hours, so you'll want friendly neighbors and a working hearth. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Tell me where you're listening from and your local time in the comments. I love seeing this sleepy little village of ours spread around the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You stand at the tide line, where small waves purl and vanish, leaving a hem of foam that tickles your boots. Pebbles glisten. Seaweed ribbons cling to the sand like green bookmarks. The air is keen enough to sting your teeth for a blink. Then it turns kind, the way a friend hands you a steaming mug and says, "Here, warm up." Following a pale path, you pass the low curves of stone walls, snug as folded arms. The roofs are weighted with slabs and turf, a steady hand pressed against the wind's old habit of testing everything. A shell lantern lifts and swings. Someone has already noticed you. A woman shades the flame with her palm, studies you, and smiles. "Long walk?" she says. "Warm hearth." She tilts the lantern, and you follow into a sheltered corridor that slides the wind off your shoulders like a shrugged cloak. The smell of smoke thickens, but not in a hurry. It strolls. Inside, the hearth is the quiet boss of everything. Firelight drapes the stone like melted bronze. A clay pot sits over coals, lid cocked, exhaling steam as politely as a guest with excellent manners. Barley stew. You taste it just by breathing. Salt, grain, a hint of shellfish, green whispers from the shore. Rounded pebbles line a shelf like friendly sentries. She gestures to a seat along the wall, a long stone warmed by skins. You ease down and discover that your bones have been negotiating with gravity all day without telling you. Heat climbs into your back, patient and thorough. A boy stirs the pot with priestly seriousness, and an older man watches the coals. "Steady now, easy." She puts a cup in your hands. The clay feels faintly sandy, as if the beach kept one fingertip on it. Steam fogs the space between you and the world, and the first sip makes an honest promise. "I will warm you." Grains give way under your tongue. Sea greens soften into kindness. You nod before you mean to. The boy pretends he wasn't waiting for that nod. Outside, the wind drums its knuckles on the roof and thinks better of it. Inside, the flames speak in lowercase. Smoke threads up the smoke hole and disappears into black, where stars pretend they haven't been eavesdropping. Everything wants to keep you awake and also let you sleep. Both are true, and neither is urgent. You learn the rhythm without being taught. Inhale, you belong. Exhale, you're safe. A small worry tries to park in your chest. Do you deserve this warmth? The woman answers by pretending you asked for more stew and handing it over. "You came on the moon water," she says, tilting her head toward the door. "Good timing. The path remembers gentle feet." You picture the tide as a seasoned storyteller editing its sentences, erasing footprints, writing new ones more slowly so a traveler can keep track. The old man clears his throat, which is how the house clears its throat too. "Hear that?" he asks, attending to a murmur above the roof. You listen. There's a padded hush, like a hand smoothing linen. Weather making up its mind, he says, satisfied. You cradled the warm cup. Someone drapes a woven wrap across your shoulders. The fibers remember a sheep and a spring wind, and you remember that the day had corners you bumped into. Here, edges round off. A draft noses in, finds nothing dramatic to disturb, and wanders out again like a polite ghost dismissed by the fire's attention. You are a visitor, but nobody treats you like a spectacle. Just another spoon at the pot, another pair of hands for later, when later comes. The woman sits opposite, curiosity that doesn't pry, only welcomes. Eat, she says. Then, after a beat, listen. The words ring like small bells in warm air. You do both. The stew deepens. Your pulse slows. The room breathes with you. A little village and a little universe, both. The grandmother rises from the bench with the quiet authority of surf drawing back, crooks a finger, and you follow. The passage out of the hearth room is a low throat of stone, domed with slabs and furred with turf above, so the wind hits it like a puzzled guest and decides to look for trouble elsewhere. Your shoulders brush cool flagstone. Your breath sounds companionable. Drops of old salt cling to the air, as if the sea left notes here and forgot to collect them. A shell button on her shawl winks each time the lantern swings. Mind your head, she says, tapping the lintel with her whalebone stick. You bow, because the house demands it, and also because bowing turns out to feel right, like saying a small, precise thank you to weathered walls that have outlived a lot of weather. Inside, the room opens like a cupped hand keeping secrets. To either side, stone beds sit like boats pulled ashore, snugged with side slabs so blankets don't wander at night. Skins soften the lines. A twist of dried sea lavender sleeps beneath one pillow, and the scent is a hush, a little field rescued from the shore. You brush the edge of a bed and feel how honest the stone is, never pretending to be something it isn't, merely promising not to move in the night. The grandmother nods at the low lips along the bed frames. Keeps the warmth in, she says, and the dreams where we left them. She turns you toward the proud face of the room, a high stone dresser set opposite the doorway, terraced shelves like quiet steps toward memory. Here, she murmurs, touching the corner with 2 fingers. Bowls sit with chalky rims. A cup waits with a thumbprint small as a moon pressed into its side. A shell pendant naps beside a tiny carved figure who smirks as if it has already heard every story you're about to tell. The dresser isn't just storage. It is the house introducing itself each morning. Here is your bowl. Here is your needle. Here is the ordinary made ceremonial by attention. When wind comes, she says, we look here and remember ourselves. She sets a new, smooth pebble on the lowest shelf and nudges it until it belongs. A solemn child pads in behind you and lifts a flat stone from near the threshold. The grandmother smiles. Show our traveler the stopper. He holds it like a treasure while she points to a narrow slot cut into the floor just inside the door. When gusts turn sly, she explains, we wedge the slab. The door remembers it is a wall. The child demonstrates with priestly focus. Stone slides, the seam tightens, the reed curtain stirs less. Wind hates patience, she adds, with that twinkle people wear when they've bargained with the weather long enough to enjoy teasing it. The house keeps its own small chorus. Peat hiss, kettles sigh, soft footsteps that know exactly which flags aren't squeakers. In one corner, the wall bulges into a tidy cupboard. Stone uprights, a pivoting slab door that swings on a pin smooth from years of use. Inside, everything is obediently sorted. Coiled cords like sleeping snakes, bone needles tucked into a strip of leather, bundles of dried seaweed for tying and for soup. She taps a shallow notch carved on the cupboard face. For counting, she says. We cut a line when we finish a net, or when winter gives us a good day. Stone doesn't forget. She nods toward another low opening. You duck. The linking passage to the neighboring house is a cool ribbon of air, roofed with slabs and carpeted with sand that remembers footsteps without judging them. Winter road, she tells you. When sky misbehaves, the village still holds hands. Your palm grazes little grip hollows pecked into the wall at hip height. You imagine a rush of storm outside, and inside, these careful places to balance big baskets and small lives. It is not dramatic. It is practical, and somehow that is more comforting than heroics. A faint whistle pricks her ear. She stops, tilts her head, and smiles the way a shepherd smiles at a familiar trouble. Roof speaking, she says. Above you, a seam has shifted a fingernail's width, and the night wants in. She kneels without complaint and pats her tunic for a wedge. Borrowed and not returned, she declares, not accusing, just amused. Bring me the kelp twist. You pass her a braided rope of dried seaweed from a hook, and she presses it into the seam, easing it with the heel of her hand. The whistle softens to a sigh. When you cannot close a door, teach the wind a new path. She sets a small beach stone to hold the twist, then gives the slab a friendly thump. The passage answers with a pleased hush. Back in the main room, she shows you a long, shallow stone box near the hearth, lined with damp sand. For shellfish to wait, and for the sea to remember where we live, she says. A thin clay drain leads away. You can almost hear water holding its breath on its way back to the shore. Beside it sits a barley basket under a woven lid weighted by a rounded stone. She tilts the lid. The grain shifts like a pale landslide. We keep grain near the talkers, she nods toward the fire, so it listens and learns how to behave in a pot. You grin, because you're starting to understand the grammar of this place. Everything listens to everything else until the village is tuned. Smoke chooses that moment to get moody. It slumps low, rubs your eyes with sooty fingers, and pretends to be offended by its own job. The grandmother raises one palm. Wait. She pulls a looped cord by the smoke hole, lifts a reed mat a hand's breadth, and the air remembers its manners. Smoke straightens its back, takes the ladder up, and leaves with a dignified shrug. Balance, she says. Fire tells stories, but it should not interrupt. You file that with the stopper, the kelp twist, the counting notch. Small, exact solutions to big, vague problems. Sit, she tells you, patting the nearest bed. It is frank under its skins, honest as stone, and you discover that frankness can be kind. She adjusts a hide curtain so it just kisses the floor. No drafts have permission to nibble ankles tonight. Her eye catches a tremble in the dresser's front foot, the kind of wobble that makes cups think about traveling, and she hums. A wedge goes under, then a thinner chip, and the shelves slip back into stillness. "We do not fight the wind," she says, "we tune to it." The line settles into the room like a proverb that was waiting for ears. You hear the stew again, thickening and content, and the boy at the hearth has upgraded from solemn to proud. The grandmother taps your wrist with her bone stick, both instruction and blessing. Now the house knows you, and you know the house. The wind tries one last polite knock and is ignored exactly the right amount. You breathe, and the room breathes with you. Bed, dresser, cupboard, passage, all of it leaning toward its purpose, to hold a life together while bringing you within reach of warmth. You thank the lintel without words on your way back to the hearth, ducking just enough to keep your pride and your head intact. The grandmother slips a woven strap across your shoulder and nods toward the door. "Before dusk," she says, as if dusk were a guest who eats quickly. Two children appear at your elbows like parentheses, one carrying a small basket, the other carrying confidence. You follow them through the linking passage, where the air tastes faintly of old salt and peat, and the reed curtain at the far end inhales and exhales with the house's slow breathing. Outside, the wind puts on its polite face again, and the sky rests in a soft gray that forgives every rough edge. You set your feet on the pale track that curls between the low stone walls, and the village folds you forward with a kind of steady patience. You reach the quiet backbone of the place, a long, low mound built from shells and ash and years of ordinary choices. It smells like the shore remembering dinner, layered, honest, not shy about its history. The children call it the midden, and they say the name with affection, as if it were a relative who tells useful stories. A stone slab hinges open on a smooth pin, and a cool breath rises from within, practical as a cellar and just as sure of its job. The older child passes you a scoop carved from bone, polished where many hands have thought the same thoughts. The basket's mouth waits, patient and wide. You dip. Grain whispers against the scoop and pours like small blonde rain. Each tilt makes a soft hiss, like a cat considering a nap. The younger child counts under his breath, not numbers but promises. One for tonight's pot, one for tomorrow's porridge, one for the neighbor who told a joke badly and should be forgiven with bread. You fall into the rhythm, scoop, pour, exhale, until the movement belongs more to the village than to you. The strap warms to your shoulder, the basket stops being a thing and becomes a companion. An odd clink interrupts the grain's hush. The older child reaches in and lifts a pebble with a hole bored neat through the center. "A weight," she says, pleased, "for weed baskets at the shore." She places it in your palm, and it sits there like an answer to a question you didn't know you were asking. You tuck it into your pouch, where it agrees to wait. The boy lowers the slab, tests it, and gives the stone door a fond pat. The mound resumes its curl of secrecy. You take the path toward the sea, the same ribbon you followed when you arrived, now softening as the tide leans back in. Gulls practice their judgmental faces on a rock. Another gull looks away with exaggerated innocence, which, as every gull watcher knows, means it is up to something. The older child points with her chin. That one steals. You nod gravely. Trust must be earned. Gulls have not applied. Reed baskets squawk along the rack line, each looped to a sunk stone so the tide may flirt but not elope with dinner. Your fingers lift a rim. The rope is wet and honest, the knot taut by patient hands you'll meet properly later. Sea greens gleam, ribbons and fronds and small frilled tongues, the color of good ideas. The boy shows you the trick for teasing sand away without losing the best pieces. A coaxing shake that says stay to the kelp, and a polite tilt that says go to the grit. You copy him, and the fronds reply with a soft slap, a happy sound. A wave steps forward, bows, and steps back with theatrical dignity. You loop the heavier basket to a second anchor stone, threading the line through the holed pebble you found in the grain. See, the older child says, grinning. Now the sea must ask nicely. The line hums a little song as the swell tests it, and then agrees to behave. You can feel the grandmother's earlier proverb, teach the wind a new path, settle here, too. Apprentice to weather, you are beginning to earn your keep. The light thins by a shade. Dusk is early to the table tonight. The older child glances at the horizon and then at you. We have time, she says, which in village talk means we should move with purpose while pretending not to hurry. You help them heave the baskets above the damp line. Beads of seawater gather in the weaving like tiny mirrors. The innocent acting gull swoops with the swagger of a petty thief, aims for the glossy fronds, and meets the flat of your hand on the lid. Not for you, you tell it, and it veers off, outraged by your good manners. On the way home you angle inward along a turf edge where herbs lodge in the village's lee. The girl pinches thyme with reverence, breathes it, and smiles. The boy finds dulse tucked like a secret between stones. You add a fistful of sea parsley, green as a fresh decision. The path lifts to meet your feet, and the three of you fall into a shared cadence that sounds like cooperation. You pass the standing stone that will matter more later. It watches you with the patient indifference of something that has seen many dinners find their way to a fire. Just as the houses return to view, the strap on your shoulder sighs the good sigh of work done, followed by the troubling sigh of one strand giving up. The basket tilts. A handful of barley leaps like tiny stars across the path. You catch the load and kneel. The girl is there before the worry can grow legs. Wait, she says, calm and interested. From her belt she unwinds a narrow twist of dried kelp, thin, strong, seasoned. She threads it through the broken reed, binds it back to its partner, and sets the knot with the heel of her hand. The boy gathers the escaped grains as if rescuing chicks and tips them into your palm. Between the three of you, nothing is lost that wants to be kept. You test the repair. The basket answers with a small, satisfied creak. Together you shift the weight so it sits more kindly across your spine. No heroics, just better math with effort. A small cloud purses its lips over the horizon. One fat drop of rain changes its mind and returns to the sky. The doorways lean closer, or maybe your legs are eager. Either way, the distance shortens. Back through the linking passage, the house performs the same quiet magic as before. heat arriving under your skin like a remembered summer. The grandmother looks up, reads the whole errand from the tilt of the baskets and the salt on your hands, and nods with her chin. Sea greens slide into the long stone box by the hearth. A clean tide of scent rises, briny, bright, alive. You and the children pile herbs on the table. Barley rustles into a bowl. The boy at the fire grins without looking away from his important stirring. "It will taste like singing," he declares, and you suspect he is right. You set the holed pebble on the dresser's lowest shelf beside the smooth stone the grandmother placed earlier. The shelf accepts the gift without fuss. Balance is its habit. The strap presses one last note into your shoulder and goes slack. Its job done. Outside, dusk pulls a gray blanket over the world and tucks it under the sea's chin. Inside, the room becomes a hush with purpose. You breathe with it, kelp and grain and the quiet promise of soup, and feel the story thicken along with the stew. The quern waits on the low bench like a moon fallen indoors, its hollow worn into a soft valley by years of patient insistence. The grandmother touches the stone the way you'd greet an old friend, palm first, pressure gentle, then gestures for you to kneel. A bowl sits ready at the downhill edge to catch the future, and a folded hide pads your knees so your bones don't feel personally attacked by archaeology. You set your basket aside. Tonight you plan to do one task at a time, and do it kindly. The boy at the hearth leans just far enough to watch without neglecting his simmering masterpiece. She lets a handful of barley rattle into the quern's belly and settles the rubbing stone in your palms. Oval, heavy enough to matter, smooth enough to teach. "Rock, don't roll," she says, smiling as if the stone has laughed at that line for decades and still isn't bored. You lean into the movement, a slow tide forward, a friendly retreat back. Grain surrenders with a soft hiss that sounds like yes said 100 small times. The first powder appears at the rim, shy and important, dusting your fingers the color of patient weather. You find the rhythm, shoulders loose, elbows easy, hands steady. Stone hums on stone the way a kettle hums before a contented boil. Flour drifts into the bowl in a small weather system. Brief pale fog, a clearing, then another fog. The grandmother watches your breath more than your technique. When you exhale smoothly, the grind is kinder. When you tighten, the grit nips back. "Stones like conversation," she murmurs. "They stop listening when you shout." The boy supplies narration like a festival herald. "Our traveler speaks fluent barley," he announces, then staggers theatrically as flour floats his way. The older child arrives with a shell scoop and feeds a careful trickle of grain at the top of each stroke, tidy as a metronome. Each addition feels like a promise kept. You catch yourself smiling because the work has turned into a lullaby you sing with your hands. Your rubbing stone catches a tiny ridge. The quern answers with a clunk that startled your balance. The bowl thinks about escaping. You snatch it back before it has time to write a tragic poem. The grandmother cocks an ear, then tilts the quern with a practiced knee bump to reveal a pebble wedged like a badly chosen word in a fine sentence. "Visitor from somebody's boot," she says, approving neither pebble nor boot. The older child plucks it out with exaggerated delicacy and places it on the floor where it can contemplate its life choices. "Teach the wind a new path," the grandmother adds, echoing herself as she nudges the stone true. "And teach a pebble to mind its business." Back to grinding. The stone feels lighter not because it changed, but because you did. The valley accepts the grain with gratitude. The bowl accumulates a dune of flour so soft your fingers itch to draw in it. You do, once, an innocent spiral, and the grandmother pretends not to notice, which is the most merciful kind of noticing. A sneeze ambushes you. Flour jumps off your face like a startled gull. The room delays its laughter for the dignity of your nose, then lets it out in a friendly ripple. "Respectable ghost," the grandmother declares, brushing your cheek with her knuckles. She pinches water from a clay cup and flicks it in a slender arc along the grain's path. Dust calms, scent wakes. Warm, nutty air rises and satisfies a part of your brain that keeps useful lists you never see. You add another handful and the work becomes an unhurried conversation. Questions asked by the quern, answers given by the rubbing stone, patient summaries offered by the bowl. When your shoulders whisper about fatigue, the older child takes a turn without ceremony. She moves with the quiet confidence of someone who knows how to keep food and mood steady with the same motion. Between turns, the grandmother slides a thin, flat chip under one leg of the bench, adjusting for a wobble none of you honored with words. "Never argue with a floor," she says. "Give it a good reason to be kind." The bench obliges. The grind grows silkier. The dune in the bowl becomes a small beach. If you listen very hard, you almost hear wavelets in the sift. You know it is imagination, and you also know imagination has good ears. A neighbor slips in with a coil of woven cord around his wrist, tastes the air, and nods at the flower like a man who has been waiting for exactly this weather. He sets a small bundle by the door, bone awls, a shy handful of beads, a promise that later will be generous. He says for stories, and the grandmother's eyes drift toward the dresser shelf, where offerings have started to collect like quiet constellations. Your hands return to the stone. Muscles learn without boasting. You begin to feel the difference between a grain that crushes and a grain that slides, the way a good listener can feel the difference between someone telling the truth and someone circling it. The girl sifts with a shallow basket, letting husk float like distant fog toward the hearth, where the flames accept all gossip without judgment. The boy retrieves a pinch of salt from a horn, dramatic, as if producing a new moon. He intones, "For the stew," but he glances at the flower as if it too deserves ceremony. The last handful goes in. You set the rubbing stone aside and flex your fingers. They answer with tiny, affectionate protests. The bowl, once patient, now seems proud. The grandmother lifts it as if lifting a story, tips the flour into a wide dish and smooths it to calm with the flat of her hand. A few husks cling like stubborn thoughts. The girl flicks them away with her thumbnail. The air tastes faintly sweet. From the hearth comes a gentle call, a bubble like a shy drum, the stew inviting its new companion. The boy beams as if the pot complimented him by name. You drape linen across the flour and rest your palms there, feeling warmth rising through cloth and work and into you. You think of the stopper that turned a door into a wall, the kelp twist that taught a seam to hush, the holed pebble that promised gravity to a rope, the counting notch that made stone remember. This too counts, this soft dune born from steady circles and small breaths. Your shoulders have learned the village's grammar. Your hands have learned its accent. When the grandmother nods once, approving the bowl's quiet mountain, you feel a simple, good heaviness settle in your arms, the kind that means you helped. The pot decides to speak in complete sentences now, small, respectful bubbles lifting the lid a finger width, as if asking permission to be remarkable. The grandmother grants it with a nod. You tilt the dish of flour you conjured from the quern, and the dune slips like pale cloud into shellfish broth. The boy stirs with care that would shame a priest, tracing tidy circles that persuade the flour to be friendly. Seed greens follow, ribbons and curls, and the frilled tongues you coaxed clean at the rack line, now sliding into warmth like guests shrugging off damp cloaks. Thyme and sea parsley arrive with a green hello. Salt pinches join. The air changes keys. Steam reaches for the smoke hole, remembers its manners, and goes. Not too lively, the grandmother says, tapping the pot's rim the way you tap a table to slow a story that wants to sprint. She slides 2 rounded stones beneath the pot's feet to raise it a patient thumb, and the simmer settles into a humble agreement. Teach the fire to be a companion, not a hero, she adds, and the boy repeats it softly, as if rehearsing for a day when he'll be the one tapping rims and tempering flames. People arrive in ones and twos, feet sand quiet, shoulders damp with the same honest weather. No one knocks, because walls this old don't care for formality. Every doorway is a threshold and a welcome. An aunt with hands like braided rope, a neighbor with a coil of cord and a grin, an elder whose hair remembers storms and whose eyes prefer solutions. They seat themselves the way seals choose stones, each in the right place without fuss. The dresser's bowls become moons in orbit. The good ladle performs its annual miracle of becoming everyone's favorite. Seasons, someone suggests, as if that were a small topic. Heads tilt the way gulls tilt at a good idea. The elder nearest the hearth clears his throat, which persuades the flames to listen harder. Winter first, he decides, because winter always arrives early to any conversation. He paints it with handfuls of sound, wind learning new adjectives, roofs humming their low songs, linking passages turning the village into a set of held hands. You learn to walk your chores like old paths you trust with your eyes closed. You picture the kelp twist plugged into a whistling seam, the stopper wedged to make the door a wall, and your lungs slow to match the memory of rooms tuned against weather. Someone else takes spring. Lamb breath, soft and milky, barley sprouting like a private joke you're finally in on. Birds arguing gently about where to put the sky. The boy, promoted by stew and audience, offers summer. Nets that need mending, traps that remember the tide's language, boats nosing out when the swell makes promises it will keep. The sea wears its friendly face. Then, because he is still young enough to enjoy accuracy, he adds, mostly. Boats, then, the elder with storm hair smiles into the steam. Hug the land, he counsels. The land hugs back. He describes how a good day hides its shoulders from the wind, how oars speak if you listen with your forearms, how seabirds are better maps than any carved line could ever be. He mimes the lift and set of a paddle, the way a small craft becomes a thought you finish rather than a beast you tame. You know nothing about hulls or lashings, and still your chest understands this. Cooperation instead of conquest. Lucky finds, the ant suggests, and the room grins, because that's a game with gentle stakes. Driftwood wins first. Everyone nods as if remembering the same sweet log. A whalebone rib second. A hush of respect folds around its mention. A cup of bright pebbles third, poured out on the table so they glitter like a small argument about stars. The neighbor uncoils his cord, reveals a tiny seal-tooth charm the color of moonfat, and lays it on the shelf with offerings. The shelf accepts with its usual calm. The storyteller, he's the one who never hurries and therefore always arrives on time, pinches his throat string as he leans in. A bead slides into view, smooth and pale as bottled dawn, bored through and polished the way water teaches patience. He gives it a fond thumbstroke, a reflex you file away without knowing why it matters yet. Found it when I was your size, he says to the boy, who immediately stands a fraction taller. Sand tried to keep it. I negotiated. You carry bowls as the ladle blesses each in turn. The stew tastes the way good work feels, warm, deliberate, generous without fanfare. The barley thickens the sea until they come to terms. The greens add the polite scandal of brine, and the shellfish whisper something you don't need to repeat to understand. Your bowl heats your palms until your bones stop pretending they are separate from the village. You eat and people talk, and the talk seasons the stew further, as if words were another herb you forgot to pick and are now pleased to taste. A small problem toddles in, because stories balance the way roofs like weight. The pot decides to flirt with a boil-over, swelling the lid into a boast. The boy startles, the ladle splashes, and the stew threatens a dramatic exit. Without annoyance, the grandmother tucks 2 new stones under the pot's legs, lifts the reed mat at the smoke hole a careful finger, and blows once across the rim, a note on a flute you didn't know the pot could play. The stew subsides with theatrical dignity. Not today, she tells it, and the room laughs as you would at a friend saved from their own enthusiasm. The boy lifts an eyebrow you recognize, an apprentice memorizing the exact size of a grandmother's breath. The elder resumes, sliding the bead along its cord like a bead on a story's thread. He tells of a low tide that walked farther than anyone expected, revealing a corridor of wet, shining secrets. A a trap churtling with fish that had misunderstood geometry, a buried basket remembering it was useful, a holed stone that would later teach a rope its manners. Yours, you realize, the one you returned with. He speaks of a night when stars leaned so close the sea borrowed one. In the morning, it turned out to be a glob of amber in kelp, smelling faintly of pine from a forest no one here has met. The aunt claims that find for herself with a glen. A mock dispute ensues, gentle as gull feathers, and resolves itself on the shelf where the tiny treasures keep equal company. By the time bowls gleam with the last honest streaks, the room has warmed into the exact color of belonging. People help themselves to the necessary silence after a good meal. Even the fire seems to sit back on its elbows. The storyteller kisses his bead with his thumb, once, absent-minded and grateful, then tucks it under his collar. You do not know that you are noticing a detail that will matter later. You only know that everything here has a way of being exactly itself: stones, wind, stew, and the thin thread that ties a story to a person's neck. More? The boy asks, already filling your bowl. You pretend to hesitate and fail, which earns you approval measured in ladlefuls. Outside, the tide rehearses its night lines. Inside, the kettle sighs into a new promise. The grandmother folds the ladle flat on the rim like a truce flag and looks pleased with the day's arithmetic: mouths, hands, heat, and the near miracle of nothing spilling that did not want to. Stew made its case, stories found their feet. Your eyelids grow heavy, and the room approves. When bowls shine clean, and the ladle lies like a tired moon across the rim, the doorway collects friendly silhouettes. Neighbors bloom from the night as if the dark itself were generous. A woman with a basket of beads stitched to the lid with pride. A man whose wrists carry loops of cord braided in 3 tempers: soft for tying, firm for nets, stubborn for roofs. A quiet cousin with a neat bundle of bone awls and needles wrapped in skin like a roll of white reeds. No one announces business. They sit, they steam a little in the hearth's approving light, and then the trading begins, the way conversation begins, politely, with memories. They spread their small wealth on a hide near the dresser, not to dazzle, but to let the room decide where each thing belongs. Beads, pale as morning milk or dark as wet stone, tick against one another like polite laughter. The awls line up with shy points. The needles gleam like slivers of moon taught to be useful. The cords uncoil in ringlets, and the grandmother checks their twist with her thumb, the way you might greet an old friend by the shoulder. "Good temper," she says, and the man nods as if she were complimenting a child who finally sleeps through storms. Payment here is a braid of favors tied around time. Your flour counts, your hands at the shore count, your quick eye on the gull earlier counts and earns a chuckle. The ant weighs a stool of cord against the promise that you'll help lash a roof when the next pouty squall comes through. The grandmother trades a bowl's scrape of fat for a needle. The neighbor slides 2 beads across the hide in exchange for a story he hopes will be told twice. The room keeps score without numbers, the way a flock knows itself in flight. You are invited to make something of your own, which is both a compliment and a test you want to pass with grace. The quiet cousin unwraps his bundle, and chooses a length of drift bone, seal burnished, feather light, veined with faint lines that look like secrets drawn with a hair. He lays beside it a flake of sandstone, smooth as a polite refusal, and all with a point like a patient thorn, and a slice of kelp, dried and oiled until it remembers being rope. "Pin," he says, tapping the bone, "for cloaks. Speak gently to it." You settle near the hearth where light is honest. The cousin shows you the first truth. Bone has a grain like wood, a path it prefers. You try a scrape across the wrong line and the edge chatters a warning. "Teach your hand a new path," he murmurs, giving you back the proverb the grandmother has already pinned to your day. You turn the bone. The sandstone whispers as it takes away what does not belong, powder lace collecting along the hide like a pale shoreline growing in slow tide. Around you, barter breathes. The bead basket woman strings 3 small discs on a hair-thin cord, holds them to the fire, and hums when they catch a little sun. The man with cords shows the boy a locking hitch that will not sulk open when wet. The aunt with ropey hands tests an awl by piercing a circle of hide. Steady pressure, no fuss, a hole round as a moon's pupil. Each demonstration is a gift wrapped in patience. Your pen begins to recognize itself. You round one end to a tidy head, slim the shank so it will glide through cloth without scolding it, and taper a point so crisp it asks for manners. The cousin gestures for the awl. "Turn," he says, and you roll the tool between your palms so the point drills a neat eye through the head. The bone sings a small note you feel more than hear. You pause to admire the idea that something found on a shore can hold a cloak against the wind, as if it has been practicing for this job its whole life. You test the point against your finger and remember the rule about avoiding heroics. The cousin nods, pleased. He says, "Polish." He sprinkles a pinched cloud of fine sand and smears a breath of fat on the hide, makes a slurry that smells faintly like evenings and honesty. You draw the pin through, again and again, until it learns to be smooth, without becoming slippery. The head brightens to a soft glow, not flashy, just sure. A hiccup arrives, as hiccups do, to keep pride from growing too loud. A faint click through your fingertips, a hairline crack begins at the eye and thinks about traveling. Your stomach dips. The cousin is already there with a shrug that says, "Of course, we live by edges." He shortens the head with 3 deliberate strokes, turns the crack into a neat notch that looks intentional, and binds the throat of the eye with a thin lash of oiled kelp. The knot sits small and clever, like a wink. He hands the pin back. "Now it remembers strength," he says. "What almost ruined it has taught it a better posture." You slide the pin through the shoulder of your wrap. It enters as if the cloth had been waiting for that exact guest. The room approves in the way this room approves best. Attention, a breath of warmth, someone passing you a bead as if to say, "Put this on your dresser someday to remember." You accept a single disc, its hole so true you can see the fire sitting politely inside it. The bead basket woman presses it into your palm with a smile that says, "No debt, only circulation." Trade twines into talk. The cordman shares how long a net should sleep in fresh water if it has soused too much salt. The ant tells how to coax a stubborn knot to confess, soak, sing, and never pull with your teeth. The grandmother holds a needle to the light and names its virtues like a prayer: straight, slender, uncomplaining, then extends it towards you. For traveling, she says, a village fits in a needle's eye if you're patient. You feel the sweetness of being trusted slip under your ribs and settle there like another small coal. The storyteller arrives late, as is his style, and accepts a bead on the condition that he will return 2 stories of equal luster. He pinches the bead along the cord at his throat, as he always does, and tucks it away. No one knows yet that this will be the night the bead plays a bigger part than ornament. For now, the room is satisfied with smaller dramas: a cord proving it will not undo itself, a pin proving it can hold a cloak, a visitor proving they can make something that belongs. When the neighbors tie their bundles and stash their gratitude on the dresser with the rest of the evening's quiet riches, the house seems to stand taller by a thought. Your hands smell like sand and bone and a little smoke. You turn your new pin once more and then leave it in place as if it has always been there. The grandmother gathers the last stray bead, sets it on the lower shelf beside your hold stone from the shore, and gives you that sideways look people reserve for family. Amused, approving, already planning what thing to teach you next. Lantern light gathers the path in a slow, golden ribbon, and you follow the fishers down to the hush where land and sea shake hands. The moon has lifted her pale shoulder out of cloud, enough to silver the sand and turn puddles into small mirrors that can't stop admiring themselves. Your new bone pin keeps your wrap tucked, the way a good idea keeps a room quiet. The wind remembers its manners. You taste salt and a little iron, the honest flavor of stones that have worked a long shift. "Watch the birds," says the fisherman with wrists ringed in cord. He nods toward 3 black shapes parked on a rock, each bird facing the same direction with the stubborn concentration of critics. They point where Sepper remembers to gather. You look, and of course, beyond them, rack lines make long brown parentheses on the sand, curving around pockets where water lingers and thinks intelligent thoughts. The man draws his foot through a strip of weed. "Tonight's tide fell with patience," he says. "Traps should like that." The traps are stone alphabets you can read with your body, low V-shaped walls whose arms open to the sea and narrow inland to a throat. At full water, fish wander in the easy way you wander into a room with music. As the tide exhales, the walls become a suggestion, then a nudge, then a firm sentence: "This way, please." Woven pots wait in the throat with their kind mouths open. Nothing here shouts. The design is the kind of clever that blushes if you call it clever. You and the girl from earlier kneel by the first weir's throat. A wicker pot sits a little off to the side, the way a chair sits after a lively conversation. The fisherman lifts it, checks for wear, then hands you the tether. You remember the locking hitch the cordman taught the boy. Twist, loop, tuck, there, and the knot nods, promising to behave even when wet. Good temper, the man approves, and the cord seems to preen. Tide pools shoulder the path like friendly neighbors. The lantern leans over them and finds galaxies, fronds fine as eyelashes, snails polishing the world with their small mouths, and an enemy that opens and closes like a slow blinking eye, unbothered by your fascination. The girl taps a smooth bottle green pebble with her thumbnail, hollow, musical. Amber sometimes hides with the weeds, she says. Smells like a forest we have to imagine. You smile, inhaling as if pine might hitch a ride on your breath. It does not, which feels reasonable. At the next weir, a small problem presents itself like a polite guest with muddy boots. One arm of the V has slumped. A seam low in the wall gurgles with impatience. Water meant to linger hurries out, and the pot grumbles, tugging its tether as if offended by bad architecture. The fisherman squats, listens with his hand in the trickle, and hums. A little too generous, he decides. He glances at you. How would you tune a door that thinks it is a window? You remember the stopper that turned a door into a wall, the kelp twist that taught a seam to hush. Give the water a different idea, you say, and he gestures a go-ahead. You wedge a flattish stone in the gap, not to block, but to suggest. The girl finds a slab shaped like a yawn and beds it into the wall with the heel of her palm. Teach the tide a new path, she says, pleased to ride the proverb. You lace a twist of dried kelp across the join to keep stones from gossiping apart. The gurgle softens to a chuckle. The pot stops complaining and settles with an almost human sigh. The fisherman grins, a line of white in the lantern glow. Architecture negotiated, he says. Seabirds lift and repark farther along, facing a new idea. There, the man says, and you shoulder a second pot. It is heavier than its cousin, all soaked authority and willow. The sand tilts under you with great interest. For a tangled breath your foot slides, your knee votes no, and the lantern's flame flutters a scandalized wing. The girl grabs your elbow, you both pendulum, and then agree with gravity instead of arguing. You plant the rim's rim, laugh at yourself in the quiet way that saves pride, and the sea, which has seen worse, does not comment. You bait the pot with crushed shells and a little kelp, a recipe older than anyone's boredom. The fisherman guides your hands. You feel the current with your fingers until your fingers start to understand sentences like hold and let. When you release the pot, it turns an inch and then finds its listening posture, mouth aimed where the slow river will bring what it brings. You thread the tether through a hold pebble, very much like the one you donated to the dresser, and then to an anchor stone sunk to its shoulders. The cord hums one low note and then is quiet. Walk the rack, the man suggests. You do, towing through the recent tatters the sea left as footnotes. You pocket 3 long strands of bright green for the stew's tomorrow, a small driftwood twig that looks like a patient finger, and a shell with a perfect hole where the moon can take a peek. You leave anything still busy with life exactly where it is. The girl approves with an expert's nod that you will definitely brag about later. A bigger wave tests the far wall with a playful slap. The lantern does its best candle impression of bravery. The wind threads your wrap. You feel your pin doing its job. What almost cracked earlier, now bound and sure. The fisherman glances at the horizon where a smear of cloud folds back on itself like dough. Just a breath, he says, adjusting the lantern's shutter. No sulking tonight. You circle back to the first weir in time to witness a quiet success. Silver flickers gather like a rumor. The pot's woven mouth accepts the compliment with dignity. You and the girl kneel, and with careful hands the fisherman lifts the pot's end clear, wet rope creaking like an old joke. Inside, a scatter of small fish and 2 crabs hold still, pretending to be geometry. He tips a few fish into a shallow basin and returns others to the throat with the bland face of a man who understands tomorrow. One crab brandishes tiny opinions. The girl sets it on the stone and guides it home with a finger that never quite touches. Not your night, she tells it. Everyone gets to believe her. The seabirds move again, this time to a rock that points the way back like a glossy signpost. The fisherman breathes, measuring. Enough, he says, with the relief of a person who prefers a small surety to a large argument. You shoulder the basin, the water sloshes and applauds your balance. The girl tucks the lantern low to shelter its flame. The light becomes a private agreement between your feet and the ground. On the walk home, the tide's edge whispers old confidences to the sand. Your boots learn the trick of stepping where water has just left, the way you learn to pull the smoke hole's cord, the way you learn to coax grain into flour, gentle, then purposeful, then gentle again. The standing stone watches you pass, unalarmed, as if it has seen enough useful nights to consider this one decent. When the village rises out of shadow, walls round-backed, roofs weighted, doorways turned to embers, you feel your shoulders drop an inch lower than comfortable, and then lower still into a comfort you didn't know you were carrying. At the threshold, the grandmother reads the tide off your sleeves and the success off your grin. The boy, ceremonious, clears space on the stone box. The basin pours its silver into a shallow hush. Taught the tide a polite voice, the fisherman reports, and the room accepts that as exact truth. You hang the lantern where it can rest its bright eye. Somewhere in your wrap, your bone pin warms to the heat of the hearth, content in its purpose, which is a good way for any tool and any visitor to end a night. The roof clears its throat, not loudly, more a thin, testing whistle in the reed mat above the smoke hole, a slender sound that threads your ear and tugs you to your feet before your brain writes a reason. The grandmother already knows. She tilts her head like a curlew and says, "Wind turning its coat." The room breathes once, all together, and then the village performs the practiced magic of becoming outdoors without going far. The linking passages fill with purposeful feet. You catch your wrap at the shoulder. Your bone pin holds with quiet pride. The cord man passes you a coil that smells faintly of salt and good decisions. Outside, the sky has the look of wool worked too briskly. A gust pads down the lane, finds the corners and slips a fingertip under the turf as if to check workmanship. Lanterns blink. The aunt, ropey hands already measuring span and slack, nods to the low wall where turf blocks doze like green lobes. "Waits up," she says, and the line forms. Pass, plant, pat. The blocks are heavier than they look, but they behave. dense, damp, companionable. You heave one to the man 3 steps ahead. He sets it on the roof's lip, where it will lean against a slab like a friend taking your side in an argument you plan to win gently. "Lashings next," the cordman calls, calm as a tide table. He hands out lines braided in 3 tempers, soft for taking a knot kindly, firm for holding shape, stubborn for telling the wind to try again tomorrow. You shoulder up the slope on hands and knees, learning each roof's polite holds, the shallow cavities where hands before yours pressed proof into turf, the gritty bite of slab edges worn to honesty. Your boots find the truth that friction tells, and the roof, pleased with your respect, lends you extra steadiness. The whistle sharpens near the smoke hole. The reed mat lifts and settles as if practicing a curtsy for a queen who may or may not attend. The boy edges up behind you with the lantern shuttered low. The light becomes a warm idea instead of a hazard. "There," he murmurs, pointing to a seam where turf has sulked apart from stone. The gap isn't large, but it is persuasive. You can feel the wind rehearsing a speech in it. The grandmother anchors herself on a slab, palm on your calf. Permission granted, impatience denied. "Teach it a better path," she says, as if you'd been waiting all night to be asked. You call for a kelp twist. One arrives, passed along the human chain from a hook by the hearth you can still smell on your fingers. The aunt's voice floats up. "Half turn, listen, then seat it." You kneel into the roof's wet breath, thread the oiled kelp along the seam spine, and ease it down with the heel of your hand the way she taught you to hush a door. The whistle drops to a sigh. A flattish stone, warm as a sleeping dog from the house-side heat, comes along the line. You bed it gently over the twist. The seam remembers discretion. The boy lets out the kind of laugh you don't let your lungs hear you did. Farther along, a turf weight has crept toward the eave, tempted by a sliding thought. The wind nudges it like a gossip. You belly crawl there, plant your chest and reach. The block is slick and opinionated. For a treacherous second your hand skates. Your knee, loyal but surprised, thinks about elsewhere. The cordman's grip appears on your belt with the cheerful authority of a cliff-top hand saved for exactly this lesson. "Hug the roof," he says, using boat words that also love houses. You draw the block back against the slab, find the old depressions where it belongs, and sew it down with a stubborn temper line. The locking hitch you learned beside the tide answers like a remembered song. Loop, tuck, set. And the knot settles, rain dark and content. "Good temper," he approves, and the wind stamps a foot at being outvoted politely. There is a rhythm to all of it. The grandmother hums a tune roofs understand. Below, someone passes wedges. Above, someone sets them with 2-finger taps that ask, not demand. The linking passages work as promised. Winter roads turned ladderless scaffolding. Children run messages because children are weatherproof and glory in being necessary. The storyteller, of all people, hands up a mat repair. Thin reeds woven into a patch as neat as a lie that means well, and winks. "For the queen who may attend," he says, nodding at the smoke hole. You take the patch and stitch it under the lifted corner with soft temper cord, so it can flex without sulking. The mat's edge lays down like a dog told bedtime. A thump, and then a chorus of small curses swallowed because the sky doesn't need encouragement. A turf block lands crooked near the ridge, threatening to tip its neighbor. The aunt spider walks up with the serene ferocity of someone who has been in negotiation with weather longer than most storms last. Share, she tells the blocks, and shows them how. Slide a hand's breadth, trade a little weight, respect the slab. She tucks a wedge, pats both as if they were stubborn children, and the ridge smooths its hair. For one tick, the wind lunges. The lantern's flame folds. The mat lifts a palm at you, and the smoke hole tries to resume its earlier whistle with 2 extra notes. You lean in, cheek damp, and blow across the gap as the grandmother blew across the stew. One calm breath, no scolding. The reed remembers how air prefers to travel. The flame sits up straighter. The wind, embarrassed, busies itself with the edge of village grass and pretends it meant to do that. Walk it, the cordman says, meaning test every lashing with hand and ear. You go, palm to line, listening for complaint. A good lashing hums like a low promise, a bad one chatters like a jaw. You find one chatterer. It's not proud, and therefore useless. You loosen, smooth, retie with the hitch you now trust, and the line takes a long, relieved breath. The boy copies your motion on the next tie. His fingers, flower grit still in the prints, make a tidy cousin of your knot. Apprenticeship, mid-roof, under a sky that has stopped pretending it was ever reasonable. When the work slows from urgent to careful, the village steps down from the roof with the same coordination it used to climb it. The chain reverses. Hands freed from turf find bowls to carry, knives to stow, a lantern to thank. The grandmother checks the seam one last time, palm flat, reading wind with skin the way fishers read it with wrists. Hushed, she says, satisfied. Below, you catch your boot on the last slab and laugh at yourself before the ground can form an opinion. The aunt claps your shoulder once, an agreed receipt for services rendered. Indoors, the house greets you with its well-behaved smoke and the grin of a fire given a second chance to be modest. The boy lifts the mat's cord by a thumb's breadth, the way you saw you do, and the room's air remembers to climb instead of sulk. Someone passes you a cup that tastes faintly of thyme and charcoal. Your hands shake exactly once, enough to tell you that they were busy being brave, and now they can be ordinary again. The cordman coils a leftover line and slips it into your palm. For a pocket roof, he jokes, meaning for later, for luck. The whistle does not return. Instead, the roof sings its pleasant, heavy song, turf loaves damping the rhythm like good bread settling after the oven. The grandmother sets your empty cup on the dresser with the evening's other proofs, pebble with a hole, bead that will matter, bone pin glinting at your shoulder. We do not fight the wind, she repeats, gaze warm and practical. We tune to it. The room, house, hands, hearth agrees. Outside, the gust tries one last line and, hearing itself rebuffed by kindness, goes off to ask the standing stone for advice. The stone, being stone, says nothing. Indoors, you feel taller by the exact height of a roof you helped keep quiet. It happens as small losses always do. Mid-laughter, right after usefulness sits down. The storyteller reaches for the cord at his throat to punctuate a line about a seal that liked jokes, pinches nothing and pauses so briefly you almost miss it. His thumb searches a collarbone that reports only wool. He pats left, right, a little harder. His smile keeps its shape, but misplaces its courage. The grandmother, who reads storms on skin, notices. Her look is not scolding, only practical. "Where did your hands work last?" she asks. The room answers with a dozen memories. Dresser, baskets, roof, reed mat, door. "We'll find it," she adds, the way you tell a pot to simmer. No hurry, only certainty. He lifts the cord to show the problem. The thong has been rubbed thin where his thumb pets it when tails turn tight. The break is clean, not sulky, an honest surrender at a familiar weak place. Not magic, the storyteller says, almost convincing himself. Just a counting stone. The boy looks stricken, as apprentices do when they think their carelessness might be contagious. You set a palm on his shoulder. "We fixed a roof," you remind him. "We can fix a string." The grandmother divides the search like bread. "You," she nods to you and the two children, "passage, baskets, shore edge." To the cord man, "Roof, lashings, smoke hole patch." To the ant, "Door seam, the place where wind flirted." To the storyteller, "Retrace your pride, the stone remembers." She wedges the door slab half a thumb to hush a draft and turns the house into a listening shell. The linking passage receives you with its clean, cool breath. Your lantern is shuttered low so light won't shout. The sand underfoot is the village's quiet notebook. Every hour writes in it and doesn't bother to sign. You kneel where the passage mouth narrows and let the lantern's eye look slantwise. Footprints speak their simple verbs: went, came, paused. You search for a rounder mark, a small comma where something smooth met sand and considered rolling. There, two neat dints close together, then a tidy line like a slug's dream of a necklace. The girl sees it too and grins without sound. "He hung the mat patch," she mouths, pointing toward the smoke hole's ladderless cousin, the place where roof met hand. You follow the tiny punctuation. Comma, comma, line. At the threshold stone, the trail complicates into a braid. Tonight's feet, earlier's feet, a child's heel that will always squeak. The ant's reed curtain has a tiny snag at its hem, a single hair of fiber tugged loose. On it, a dusting of pale grit like flour's shy cousin. You remember the bead's milk-light surface, the way his thumb polished it until it behaved like bottled dawn. You ease the thread free and cup it like a moth. "Tinier than a story," the boy whispers, impressed by small evidence. Baskets first. You go to the stack by the hearth, the kelp twists coiled like sleeping eels, the cord man's loops, the bead woman's lid stitched proud with little discs. Basket voices are busy voices, whispering all the errands they have carried. You lift each one as if waking a friend, palm under, lantern angled, listening for the clink that says, "Stone greeting willow." The boy tilts a narrow tray, something ticks and settles. But it's only the hold pebble you donated, glimmering with the modesty of a tool that already did its good deed at the tide. You set it back on the dresser's lower shelf beside the smooth beach stone. The shelf, being shelf, doesn't judge your impatience. "Try the shell box," the girl suggests, and you do, lifting the lid where sea greens rested earlier. The long stone tray is damp elegant, its drain sighing faintly as it forgets a trickle. You skim the surface with 2 fingers, respectful of any resident crabs who might dislike sudden fame. Only sand, a lazy ribbon of dulse, and the honest scent of yesterday's tide. The boy shakes his head. His disappointment is energetic but brief. "It would be a funny place to hide," he concedes, already scanning the dresser's shadowed skirts. The storyteller, retracing, finds his own trail in gestures. "Here," he mutters, tapping his ear where memory lives. "Here I laughed at the aunt's scold. Here I remembered to be humble." At each spot he pats the floor, a habit from a childhood that believed in coins under flags. Nothing answers. You duck back through the passage and out into the lane. The wind has become polite again, as if embarrassed about earlier. Lanterns along the village curve make a procession of small moons. Your flame joins without demanding front row. Sand outside is less articulate than the passage, but it tries. You move slow. Further along by the standing stone that watched you earlier, the night breathes colder, pressing its palm to your cheek and leaving frost thoughts. "Cold shore stones," the grandmother had said, and you find your way toward the tide's dark hem where puddles wait like open eyes. On a flat rock at ankle height, something has overturned a tiny dome of warmth, a footprint, the storyteller's narrow one, and beside it a puckered wet ring where a small round thing rested and then went. Your breath does the wrong thing, and you forgive it. The boy crouches, lantern low. The light coins the ring with trembling gold. The girl prods a tuft of kelp. Nothing clinks. The sea gives a little laugh, the kind that isn't unkind, but has no plans to help. "If it came here," the boy says, learning the anatomy of loss out loud, "it could have rolled to the water." You widen the search the way you widen a net. Not farther, but smarter. You look where rolling things pause against a pebble, inside a shallow, at the lip of a tide line. The moon, who enjoys drama, hides with a cloud until your eyes admit they will have to carry more of the work. The standing stone gives no comment. A crab rehearses indignation at your shadow and then thinks better of it. The girl tips the lantern, sprinkles a handful of sand from her pocket into a crooked lip near the footprint, and shakes, listening for a tap against a hollow, a trick she must have learned from someone who liked to rescue marbles from floorboards. No tap. Only the hush of grains settling where grains prefer to be. You track back, then forward, then back again, narrowing your attention until each pebble has a name and none of them are bead. The boy notices a thread snagged on the edge of the Tide Pot's tether, a slip of thong, not unlike the storyteller's, dark with sea wet and faintly sticky where salt has written its map. He holds it up with the reverence of a scholar. "Proof," he says. "It tells you something. The bead's cord broke early, maybe even before the roof work. It could have slid down his shirt, dropped when he leaned to pass the mat repair, bounced from threshold to lane to shore as if it wanted a tour." A gull lands nearby with an exaggerated sigh, folds its wings, and pretends indifference to your business. It watches you, not watch it. You watch it, not watching you. Not helpful, you tell it, which is exactly the kind of sarcasm gulls understand and ignore. The cold learns your fingers and asks for rent you do not wish to pay. You tuck your hands under your wrap and feel the bone pin do its small work faithfully, binding cloth like a good sentence holds a thought. You blow a single calm breath across the lantern's mouth to steady it, the way the grandmother blew across the stew, the way you blew across the reed mat's wayward edge. The flame agrees to be steady, and inside that steady you think of the dresser's habit of making ordinary things ceremonial. We should search where stories sit, you say. Back along the lane, the village looks like the inside of a shell, curved, lit from within, singing a note you can feel in your teeth. You step through the passage where the sand rewrites your arrival into the notebook. The grandmother meets you with a glance at the ring of cold on your skin and moves aside so you can kneel at the hearth bench. You lift the skins, run your hand along the groove where a fallen thing would choose to rest. Nothing. The boy checks the floor wedge by the door. The ant fishes inside the rolled edge of a reed mat and retrieves a surprised beetle who is thanked and rehomed. Laughter is quiet, and the room lets it be. The storyteller stands very still, eyes traveling the room as if it were a map he forgot how to read. "It will not be lost," the grandmother says. Not to him exactly, but the sentence fits him anyway. It is only misplaced. She pours a little barley into your palm, another into the boy's, another into the girl's, for luck while looking. You three tilt your hands at the same time, and the grains make a soft, familiar hiss as they fall back into the bowl. The sound is a promise. This village likes to keep its circles closed. You look again at the dresser, at your holed pebble glinting beside the smooth beach stone, at the spare bead the basket woman gifted you earlier, at the cord the man tucked in your palm for a pocket roof. A thought rises, slow as steam. Perhaps what is missing is near what is not missing. You step closer to the offering shelf, the place the room uses to remember itself. The lower edge is chipped, a shallow nick from long years of being exactly where it is. In that nick, something pale has wedged very neatly, as if paused between choosing to fall and choosing to stay. Your breath misbehaves. You lean, careful, careful, and the ant's hand appears at your elbow with the exact pressure that says you are not alone with this finding. You do not pluck it yet. You only look, and the room leans with you. The shape is right. The color is right. The size is right. The storyteller does not breathe. Your lantern paints a small oval of warmer light around the place where maybe, just maybe, the bead decided to wait and be discovered at the correct part of the story. The grandmother smiles a secret you are almost allowed to know. Let's hear how the hearth tells this next part. You do not reach in with greedy fingers. You tilt the lantern so warmth, not heat, coaxes shadows to step aside, and in the small crescent under the dresser's chipped lip, the pale bead winks back like a patient moon that took a wrong turn and waited for a better sentence. The room holds its breath in the polite way of people who know that relief is fragile when it first hatches. The ant's steadying hand is still at your elbow. Slow, she whispers, which is how everything in this village prefers to be handled. You slide your smallest finger into the nick, feel cool stone, a smooth rim, the bead's soft insistence. It resists once, as if asking whether you've earned the right to finish this story, then yields. In your palm, it is lighter than the worry it removes. The boy's face travels from fear to astonished gratitude without stopping anywhere rude. The storyteller doesn't speak. His eyes are old boats coming safely into a familiar cove. Listen now, the grandmother says, and the hearth squares its shoulders to play host. She sets a low bowl on the bench, and you roll the bead into it so everyone can watch it glimmer without losing it again to an enthusiastic floor. While the bowl keeps it, she adds, let's ask the room a riddle or three. Answers tend to bring friends. The courtman grins because riddles are just knots with manners. What has an eye and pulls a village through it, he asks, voice like braided fiber. The boy lifts the needle the grandmother gave you earlier, tilts it so the fire paints the hole with a hot comet. That one, he says, shy proud. Laughter travels the walls like pleasant weather. The ant offers another, tapping the wedge that turns a door into a wall. What closes without being shut? You answer with your palm on the stopper, feeling its thick patience. This, you say, and the proverb appears without help. Teach the wind a new path. The room hums approval because answering with a sentence that has already worked is the best kind of clever. The storyteller clears his throat, not ready to confess yet, so he hides in play. What is lost when looked at and found when forgotten, he asks, eyes on the bead as if it might translate him. The grandmother smiles the way the sea smiles when it takes back a wave. Sleep, she says, and her look drifts to the boy who is fighting a yawn like it is honorable combat. But the riddle has another answer too, and you feel it circle the bowl, a story's thread, a bead's habit, courage that comes back when you stop chasing it with loud thoughts. He rubs the ragged end of cord between finger and thumb. The fibers are hairy with use, salted by years of his own thumb teaching it to fail. He lifts his gaze, and the confession arrives in a small boat of words. I rub it when a line can't find its landing, he says. I rub it when a child in the story needs a path out. I rub it for luck when roofs talk and stew argues and memories turn their backs. I rubbed it tonight while making a joke I've told too many times, and the cord gave me the true punchline. He lifts both hands, empty, a gesture that has nothing to do with performance and everything to do with honesty. I am sorry for the trouble I made for the room. The grandmother, who does not accept apologies the way markets accept coins, nods once to mark the truth and then turns to solutions as if she were changing songs on a well-behaved flute. Chord, she says, and the chordman is already unwinding a length of the firm temper, not the stubborn one. Stories need some give. Needle, she says, and you offer the one that has been sitting like a quiet bridge in your palm pocket. Hands, she says, and everyone offers one. Yours to guide, the boys to learn, the storytellers to get back in the practice of mending things he wears out. You thread the needle in the breathing space between heartbeats. The new thong slicks with a whisper of fat from the ant's thumb, so it will remember kindness when asked to do work. The bead waits in the bowl like a guest who understands when to stand and when to stay seated. The grandmother holds the cord taut over her knee, and you slide the needle through the bead's bright throat, easing, not forcing, listening for that small note Bone made earlier when it agreed to become a pin. There, the tiniest music, a yes you feel in your teeth. The bead rises onto the thong and settles between two knots you tie, as if telling the future to behave, one to mark gratitude, one to mark use. Wear it? The boy asks, then surprises himself, or should the shelf keep it nights? The room tastes both ideas. The dresser is where ordinary becomes ceremonial. The throat is where private fear turns to public courage. The storyteller rubs the new cord once, catches himself, and laughs softly at the lesson he is still learning. The shelf keeps it when the wind is working, he decides, and my neck keeps it when words won't mind. If I forget, the shelf will remember me. He looks at the boy, and when this cord frays, which it will because all good things get used, you will mend it before I notice, and I will pay you in fish and a story you've never heard me tell the same way twice. The bargain lands with the right weight. The bead returns to his throat for now, the knot soft against the hollow that had gone suddenly empty. He presses it, but not with the old restless urgency, more like a greeting to a friend who is staying but does not need constant proof. He looks at you. Thank you for your search. And then, because he has strict rules about balance, and for not teasing me until tomorrow. Tomorrow, the aunt agrees, deadpan, which makes everyone happier. Hearthside. Talk loosens again, but it has learned not to outshout gratitude. The elder chooses a story with a neat seam. A time the village lost the path to the best mussel bed because fog got vain and tried on all the capes at once. How they listened for the booms of far surf and the quiet of near pools and walked by ear. And a child, small, stubborn, weatherproof, told the fog very politely to find a new path. It did, the elder says, and the fire gives one satisfied pop as if approving the ending stitch. The grandmother checks the roof with her palm on the lintel. The house hums its heavy bread song. The stew pot, rinsed and tilted, dries like a moonboat. You feel the whole evening tighten to a tidy bow. Riddles asked and answered. A confession folded without shame. A solution tied with thread and promise. On the dresser's lower shelf, your holed pebble and the smooth beach stone sit with a new companion, a short scrap of the old failed cord, not kept as punishment, but as curriculum. Stone doesn't forget, the grandmother said. Neither do rooms, if you teach them how. Before sleep has its way, the storyteller leans close enough for only you to hear. If I misplace it again, he says, wry, warm, resigned to the truth of human pockets, we will begin with riddles. They always lead back. You promise, because promising to begin with play is the most serious vow in a village like this, and because you have learned that answers, when they come kindly, bring friends. The room loosens its shoulders after the beads return, and the grandmother tips her chin toward the door as if the night itself had just asked to speak. She drops a handful of barley into a small palm bowl, not overflowing, just enough to count as gratitude without bragging. From the long stone tray by the hearth she chooses 3 shells with clean, listening mouths, lets them click together once like friends saying yes. For the old neighbor, she says, meaning the standing stone who minds the edge of things. The boy takes the lantern. The girl tucks a twist of dried kelp at her belt, the way someone tucks a polite answer behind their teeth. You settle your wrap. The bone pin remembers its job and behaves like a promise. Outside, the lane is a seam stitched with small flames. Houses hunch companionably under their weight of turf. The roofs, newly tuned, hum a low bread song that makes your feet walk softer. The wind has put its coat back on the hook and agreed to behave. Overhead, stars practice being obvious. Cold coins scattered across a dark that has washed itself carefully. You let your breath be visible because the night likes proof. The path to the stone is the same ribbon you walked with fishers and with baskets, only now it feels older, as if the land has put on its ceremonial mask. No one speaks, not because speech is forbidden, but because the waves have started telling a story you'd hate to interrupt. They come in as folded wings, shadows that open at your ankles and close behind you, leaving your footprints to mind themselves. The tide keeps its voice low, the beach keeps its patience, and you keep your balance without watching it too hard. The standing stone waits in its usual posture of experienced indifference. Frost has written its first draft on the upper half. Lichen has been editing for years. Someone long ago taught the stone a small bowl at its foot, a natural hollow made friendlier by patient thumbs. The grandmother sets the palm bowl of barley on the turf, touches the stone with 2 fingers, greeting, not worship, and nods at you. You first, she says, because being a traveler here means being trusted to carry the next line of the song. You kneel. The ground is fair and firm, and the cold has the manners to ask before biting. You tip the barley in a slow little rain, listening to the hiss of grain on stone the way you listened to flour on quern, 100 small yeses. The shells arrive next, one by one, placed upright so the sea, passing by in its thoughts, could whisper into them and be answered later. The boy angles the lantern so the flame can lean in without bossing. The girl loops her twist of kelp around a tuft of grass and tucks its end under. Not to tie the stone, no one here ties stones, but to remind the grass to stand kindly when wind forgets how. Not asking for more, the grandmother says softly, to no one and everyone, thanking for enough. She takes a barley pinch for the house that kept its smoke polite tonight, one for the trap that remembered geometry, one for the roof that learned to hush. The aunt adds a crumb of fat left on her thumb and wipes her hand clean on air. For good joints, she mutters, and the cord man snorts in agreement, flexing wrists that have tied more doors shut than any storm has opened. A tiny problem arrives, because even gratitude is happier with a companion. A gull, late to supper and offended by protocol, plops down with the gravity of an official and eyes the barley as if it were back pay. It hops twice, practicing ownership. The boy lifts the lantern a polite inch. The gull reconsiders the concept of dignity, tilts its head so far it sees its own foolishness, and flaps away to inform a rock. The grandmother flicks a single grain onto the sand, conciliatory. For the gossip, she says, because gossip likes to be fed just enough to keep it in a good mood. The storyteller arrives last, on purpose, like a closing paragraph that knows where the period goes. He touches the new chord at his throat and bows to the stone not as to a judge, but as to a wit old enough to appreciate a bow that is half joke. From his pocket he produces the scrap of worn thong the grandmother saved as curriculum and lays it beside the shells. For what breaks and teaches, he says. The knight finds the sentence acceptable and moves the stars a fraction to mark the moment. The elder, who names seasons with his voice, points at 3 bright flints above the horizon. The millstone, he says, the cluster that everyone else calls something else. Beside it, the boat, which other mouths would call the Big Dipper, tilts as if ready to pour kindness. Farther toward the sea, seal and pup, 2 low sparks that insist on being kin. None of it needs to match anyone else's map. A sky is good at holding several truths at once. You feel relieved by this, as people do when they realize that names are helpful, but not necessary for belonging. Condensed frost whispers under your knees. You lean back on your heels and listen to the waves fold and open their wings again. You remember the holed pebble you set on the dresser, the stopper that turned a door into a wall, the kelp twist that taught a seam to hush, the counting notch that told stone to remember. The offering feels less like payment and more like good bookkeeping, recording that the day balanced out without stealing from tomorrow. Your shoulders reset to a height they've been looking for since the moon rose. A brief gust tests your face with inquisitive fingers. The lantern blinks. The shells quiver, conversational. Without thinking, you slide your palm behind the flame, not to fight the wind, only to tune it, the way you learned with a pot and a smoke hole and a reed mat that thought it was a bird. The flame steadies. The grandmother notices and says nothing, which is how praise travels best out here. Someone, maybe the girl, starts a hum low enough to sit on the sand. It isn't a song you know, except your bones know it from somewhere they collected long before this night. The hum folds around the stone, the shells, the barley, the 3 grains reserved for gossip, and adjusts its own volume to match the beach. Above you, the boat leans another fraction. Far out, a shape breaks and smooths the water, the suggestion of a seal, the universe doing a decent impression of being playful on cue. When the offering feels finished, not performed, the grandmother brushes her knuckles across the stone one last time, collecting frost she does not keep. She stands with the gentle sound of a well-made bench. The boy dips the lantern. The light steps backward the way a good host recedes to let a door close softly. No one says, Amen. The waves say it for you by laying down one last wing and drawing it back with a dry hush. On the walk home, the lane has turned into a river of friendly shadow. The roofs you waded earlier keep their confidences. A reed mat lifts a breath, remembers its lesson, and settles. The standing stone does what standing stones do best. Nothing. And somehow that feels like work performed on your behalf. Back at the threshold, the aunt leans the door slab half a thumb in the other direction to remind the draft that a house is a place where wind visits but does not linger. The dresser waits with its calm face. You set a single shell there, not the prettiest, only the one that listened best, and the shelf makes room without fuss. Sleep tugs, not a thief, a friend with the right keys. The night can keep the rest of the barley. You have learned the important arithmetic. Give thanks first. Fix what can be fixed. Tuck the small failures beside the small treasures so each can teach the other, and let waves teach your pulse how to fold and open its wings until it is ready to fold and stay. The house gathers itself for a last brightness, like a candle that remembers one more story and decides to tell it. The stew returns to the hearth, not to boil, only to be warm enough to say yes when anyone wanders by with a bowl. The fish you coaxed from the weirs rest in a shallow pan near the coals, skin crisping, edges whispering. Flat cakes arrive from a stone beside the fire, where dough has been practicing patience. You recognize the flower's voice you sang into being at the quern. The boy, promoted to ladle master, makes a circuit so dignified the ladle behaves like a scepter with excellent manners. You take a seat where the stone bench remembers you. The grandmother tears a flat cake and passes half to you, the other to the bead basket woman. Generosity moves clockwise without consulting a clock. Someone squeezes a ribbon of sea parsley over a fish. Someone else taps salt like light snow. Talk lowers itself to the gentle register of people who would rather the food speak first. It does. Barley rounding out the sea's bright opinions. Fish clarifying everything you worried about an hour ago. Greens reminding your mouth that the shore keeps its promises. Second helpings, the boy declares, already certain you will be reasonable and accept. You do, of course, out of courtesy, naturally, not greed. A gull peeks at the doorway and files a complaint with its eyes. The ant shuts the reed curtain with the kind of finality that still counts as polite. The gull, shocked by bureaucratic efficiency, goes to consult the standing stone. When bowls are mostly memory, the cord man gestures you nearer. He unwraps 3 short braids, each the color of a different weather, a soft temper length like wet fawn, a firm one the brown of honest peat, and a stubborn tempered cord almost black with oil and good intentions. Bracelet, he says, but the word feels too small. He nods at the girl. Tell our traveler the lesson of 3. She lifts the soft cord. For learning, she says, it takes knots kindly and forgives when you fumble. She adds the firm, for keeping shape. She raises the stubborn last, for saying, not today, to weather. The cords lie across her palms like lines on a map you can finally read. The boy brings your wrist, palm up, the skin still rinsed with cold shore and stew steam. The cord man begins to plait, soft laid between firm, firm over stubborn, stubborn under soft, a conversation taught to hold. The small problem pads in wearing slippered feet. The first knot lands a fraction too tight, more ambition than kindness, and you feel the bracelet's logic pinch your pulse. You say nothing because you were raised to be brave around jewelry, but the grandmother's eyebrow reads your wrist like the roof seam and makes a suggestion at the air. The cord man smiles, undoes 2 moves, and oils the stubborn strand with a touch from the ant's thumb. Teach the knot to remember you are not a roof, he murmurs. He sets the hitch again, the same locking cousin you learned beside the tide, leaving a breath of ease between loop and skin. Your hand relaxes, the bracelet answers by being present without insisting. The boy threads a tiny shell disc, the one you chose for the dresser earlier's cousin, onto the soft strand as he finishes, the hole true as an eye. For listening, he says, and tucks its edge under the braid so it will flash when you turn your hand to helpful work. The girl adds a final neat half-hitch she learned on the roof, the sort that unfastens without sulking. So you can grow, she says, practical as rain. They hold the finished circle up to the fire. The shell catches the hearth the way your earlier bead caught the lantern. The cord man ties the bracelet on you with 2 quiet pulls. The knot seats like an agreement everyone meant to keep. The grandmother taps it once with her bone stick, a blessing disguised as quality control. Carry the village, she says, and somehow it doesn't feel heavy at all. A laugh at the doorway, an honest, tired one. The fisherman appears with one last basin in case the stew forgot anyone. It didn't, but he sets the basin anyway, because abundance likes seeing itself. He leans the basin at just the right angle to dry, the way he leaned the pot at the weir's throat. The elder claims a final sliver of fish and declares with solemn authority, "Now it is officially delicious." The room agrees, relieved to have paperwork in order. Another small hiccup. The storyteller reaches to hang the ladle by its usual peg, misses by a barley's width, and the spoon claps the floor once, very surprised to be there. The boy looks stricken, then looks at you, then remembers that mishaps are just shy lessons. He picks up the ladle, checks its edge for chips, finds none, and, on the grandmother's nod, hangs it on the next peg over, one that fits the ladle's curve better. "Teach the peg a new path," he says, cheeks pink, and the room laughs the kindly laugh that makes errors feel like apprenticeships. Gifts make a small island on the dresser. Your holed pebble from the shore, the spare bead you were given, a coil of leftover soft temper cord, the scrap of old thong the storyteller laid by the shells, and now a shellmate to the one in your bracelet. The dresser receives each without drama, its shelves steady as calm breathing. You add one more thing, a clean, thumb-smoothed pebble from your pocket, warm with your day, and slide it beside the cord coil. "For returning," you say. The shelf does not argue. Good nights begin in the particular order of a place that has learned not to rush farewell. The bead basket woman ties her lid with a twist you now understand. The aunt tucks a strand of hair back with the same motion she used to quiet the mat. The fisherman touches the ridge of his cap to the boy's ear as if polishing good sense. The elder pats the door slab like a horse that has behaved itself. Each person turns to you not as a spectacle, but as a hand that helped. They thank you the village way, with sentences you can carry. You listened. You tied kindly. You'll remember. You help bank the hearth. The grandmother shows you how to rake the coals into a soft hill so morning can find them without sulking, how to lay 2 patient chunks of peat like sleeping seals, how to leave the mat just a finger's lift so smoke can walk out without tripping. The room exhale sings, bread loaves settling, cord loosening, fish bones agreeing to become stories. At the threshold, the storyteller stands with you a breath longer. He touches his bead and then your bracelet, as if ringing 2 bells in harmony. "Riddles tomorrow," he promises, "if weather allows." You answer with the village's proverb, already yours. We don't fight the wind. He grins, finishing it for you. We tune to it. You duck the lintel without thinking now. Outside, the roofs keep their new song. The lane is a dark ribbon laid with quiet sparks where other doorways glow. The standing stone lifts its silhouette against a sky that pretends it has not been watching. You feel the bracelet warm to your skin, the shell a small crescent sleeping against your pulse. Sleep comes toward you along the passage like a sure-footed friend. Behind you, the grandmother draws the stopper half a thumb, and the door remembers it is a wall. The night, satisfied with the arithmetic of enough, carries the village into its slow, careful dreaming. Dawn rinses the roof in pale milk, and the house wakes with decent manners. You rise before language, stir the hearth's small hill until coals remember their jobs, and lay 2 patient peat chunks so the new day can find its breath. The grandmother's bone stick taps once on the dresser. Good morning, inventory, and you help with the quiet arithmetic of leaving things better than you found them. Skins shaken and folded, bedstones smoothed with a palm, bowls wiped and turned mouth down like dozing moons, the shell from last night's offering set where the shelf keeps listening. The boy coaxes a thread of smoke toward the hole and adjusts the reed mat the way you showed him. The room's air climbs without complaint. The aunt slides the stopper, just a thumb, to tell the draft how a door intends to behave today. Teach the wind a new path, you murmur, and the proverb answers back from the stone, pleased to be awake this early. You sweep a little sand toward the passage so the house can write a fresh page. The girl brings the long shell tray. You tip out yesterday's sea breath and refill it cool, setting the greens straight as if kindness required neatness. The cord man inspects your bracelet, hums at the hitch, and, with 2 unshowy moves, leaves it looser by a whisper, for travel. Not a roof, he says again, and you grin because you have been upgraded from roof to person twice now. The storyteller touches his bead, only gently, and winks as if you share a private inventory of things that get lost and return wiser. The elder names the morning a seal day, quiet, and the fisherman agrees by not arguing. Breakfast is a soft idea, flat cake edges warmed on a stone, a spoon of last night's kind memory, a drift of salt. The grandmother wraps a heel of barley bread in a scrap of linen and presses it into your palm. For the path, she says. The aunt tucks a thin twist of dried kelp into your belt, a repair in search of its moment. The boy presents you with a riddle to carry. What leaves ashore and returns and brings you with it? You answer incorrectly on purpose so he can glow with the correction. The road, he declares, which is only a line of footprints someone taught to behave. You step into the lane with them and breathe the shy cold you've befriended. The roofs hum their loaf song. Stones wear last night's frost like careful embroidery. Out past the last house, the strand lies wide as a patient book, and low tide has underlined it in wet shine. The first footprints are easy, the 3 of you, plus the grandmother's from earlier, the tiny question marks of a wren, the bold parentheses of a gull practicing authority. Farther along, where the sand hardens into grammar, last night's steps return to you, your boots' shy toe, the boy's eager heel, the girl's tidy, convinced stride. You place your feet in the old sentences, and the morning agrees to keep reading. A small problem pages you from the margin. A lace of fog slips in off the shallows and begins to blur everyone's punctuation. Gulls rehearse an argument precisely where you need proof, and their feet write nonsense across your earlier sense. The tide, changing its mind like a clever storyteller, smooths a section you were counting on, and for a breath you have that dizzy feeling you had on the roof, the one where gravity requests a meeting. The boy waits for you to choose cleverness or patience. You choose both. Hug the land, you hear the elder say from last night, and the land hugs back. You angle a step toward the weed trim a hand above damp, reading rack like a polite letter. This line old, this line new, this one laid down since moonrise. The girl watches the birds not for drama but for direction. Their bodies, all facing the same gossip, point along affirming idea. You pick up one of the holed pebbles the sea always leaves like invitations. Thread your finger through and feel where the tug is truest. You set it down as a marker, here. Then another 20 paces, here. And the sand between them speaks in the tone of friendly ground. You cross without argument. Fog considers your stubborn politeness and finds other business upriver. The standing stone arrives, patient as always. Frost has left it, and a line of sun has chosen its western cheek. You and the children pause long enough to turn a palm toward it, a thank you for nights that mind themselves, and then keep to the curve where dry sand remembers confidence. Behind you, the village lowers in the scale of a song, roofs snug, passages still holding hands under turf, smoke lifting in modest ribbons. You feel the bracelet warm against your wrist, and the bone pin sitting like a familiar noun at your shoulder. What you carry is small, what it ties you to is not. At the last dip before the path climbs into the present, the girl stops and points at the neatest of the morning's miracles, a single clean track, marching away where the sea had room to be careless and chose not to be. You set your heel in it and feel the fit the way a story's ending fits when you didn't try to bully it into shape. The boy presses a pebble into your palm, unremarkable, beautiful, the right weight. For remembering, he says, you make room beside your barley bread. For returning, you answer, and he blinks at the echo from last night's shelf, pleased to be quoted. Back at the house, you take one last look to let your bones memorize the inventory. Bedstones like boats gone ashore, dresser keeping its quiet moons, stopper lodged, reed mat behaving, shell tray glistening, the beads scrap on the lower shelf, not punishment but curriculum. The holed pebble you brought finding its forever beside the smoothed beach stone. The grandmother touches your cheek with her knuckles the way she brushed flour from it, and that's the blessing. Not grand, only exact. The cord man lifts 2 fingers. The aunt folds you into a half-hug that smells like peat and good decisions. The storyteller leans close. If you misplace us, begin with riddles. You step into the pail and follow low-tide sentences toward where your hour waits. The roofs dim behind you, then quiet, then become part of the land's long memory. You promise, not aloud, but with your feet on the wet shine, to remember these houses of stone, to keep their proverbs handy in your pockets, to tune rather than fight when weather in any world becomes opinionated. The sea lays down one last wing and lifts it again. You walk inside its hush, carrying a village at your wrist like a small, steady song.